Hi everybody, my name is Mari-Carmen Marin, and I am here today recording this video because I want to introduce you to my first book of poetry, Swimming Not Drowning, published by Legacy Book Press. It was released last week, and I felt I wanted to let you know a little bit about what the origin of the book is, how it was born. I wanted to also tell you a little bit about the content and the structure, the three parts that I decided to divide my book into. And that way you will know if you are a good audience to enjoy this book or not. So let's begin with how this book was born. So 5 years ago, approximately, I was teaching a class, a 1302 class. I'm an English professor at a community college, Lone Star College at Humboldt in Houston. And I was teaching a short story in that class called The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman. In that story, there's a woman who suffers from postpartum depression, but she's living in the 19th century. And of course, at the time, nobody knew what depression was, even less postpartum depression. So at that time, she was prescribed with what they call the rest cure, and that consisted of resting, basically. She's had to stay in her room for days, and her room was pretty ugly. It was all covered with offensive, I think that is one word that is used in the story to describe that paper, an offensive wallpaper that is all yellow and has an ugly, intricate kind of like pattern. After days locked in the room, this woman begins to see figures, like people behind the pattern of the wallpaper. And those people end up being only one woman. And this woman behind the wallpaper is trying to escape the prison in which she is in. We had a really interesting and insightful discussion. And when the class was over, I went to my office, and it was like 5 minutes after I went to my office, one of my students who had been in that class came to talk to me. He told me that he wanted to thank me for having chosen a story where there is a woman who is seeing something strange and who is not believed by anybody else. And he told me so because apparently he also heard voices at night and saw different people who talked to him. And the way that he told me, he was really like opening his heart to me. And he was telling me that his parents didn't believe him. They thought that he was inventing everything, that everything was in his mind, and he could like stop seeing and hearing voices like this, which of course doesn't happen. So after he left the room, I was feeling kind of like sad and also wondering why. I had not thought up to that point that there are a lot of people who suffer from mental disorders and who are dismissed as being like crazy or weak, and they do not receive the attention that they should, and the support and the help that they should receive. So I remember I went back home that evening and I wrote a whole poem that is in my book that tried to explain mental disease in a way that is so physical that you cannot say it's all in your mind, because indeed anything that is related to the mind, can manifest or does manifest in your body. So apart from writing that poem, at that moment I began to kind of like dwell on this idea that maybe I could write a book of poetry based on my own experience suffering from anxiety from a very early age, that leads often to depression. And by doing that, I could reach out and show those who also suffer from mental issues that they're not alone, and that they should not be, that they're flawed and they're weak, because they are not to blame for what it is happening to them. So I believe that at that point is when I began to consider seriously the idea of writing a book. And I could materialize that idea last year, 2020, when during the spring I was awarded a sabbatical leave, and I had a project to work on during that leave, and my project was to write this book. So I hope that this book can raise awareness of how important it is to talk about like these issues, and to make people familiar with them so that they are not scared of people who suffer from these disorders, and they can help and they can support them, because really that is what people with mental disorders need: understanding and support and help. And that is basically how my book came to life. Now, let me tell you a little bit about the content, and also how or why I divided the content into 3 parts. So my book has 3 parts. The first one is called Deep Waters, and you see there like this beautiful illustration by Marcela Bolivar, who has created all of the art for my book. Here you see a woman who is in the middle of a storm. That is basically how I envision the first part of my book. Life contains a lot of storms, and we end up being in deep water so many times. Indeed, the original idea came from a passage from a short story by James Baldwin called Sonny's Blues that I also teach in my classes. In this story, we have like 2 brothers who live in Harlem during the 1950s. Their life is pretty gloomy, but one of them, the narrator, who is unnamed from beginning to end, and who is the older brother, he manages to avoid feeling anything, avoid confronting his situation in life. However, his younger brother, whose name is Sonny, is more sensitive, I would say, and he cannot repress his feelings and cannot suppress his demons, and he falls into the trap of drugs. Apart from being a victim of drug addiction, he loves music, and he indeed is a jazz musician, or wants to become a jazz musician. And we see towards the end of the story how it is his music, his piano, that helps him deal with his demons. And towards the end of the story, we see how the unnamed brother, who I told you tries to keep at bay all of his pain and his feelings, he goes to see Sonny to a nightclub to see him play, and while observing him pouring out all of his suffering, through the keys of the piano, and by singing also Be Guided by this friend, Creole, who is also a jazz musician, the narrator realizes that he has been wrong all his life by wanting to repress his feelings, that we cannot live without bottling up our feelings inside, because the only thing that can happen by doing that is to be, you will become detached. You will become disconnected from yourself and from others. So there's this quote towards the end of the story that I included, that is at the opening of my book, and in which we see the narrator observing Creole helping Sonny deal with his demons through the music. And the narrator says, he was having a dialogue with Sonny, and he is Creole, Sonny's friend. He wanted Sonny to leave the shoreline and strike out for the deep water. He was Sonny's witness that deep water and drowning were not the same thing. He had been there, and he knew. And he wanted Sonny to know. He was waiting for Sonny to do the things on the keys which would let Creole know that Sonny was in the water. The whole story is beautifully written. But this last part of the story is very lyrical, and this particular quote or passage always called my attention and made me stop and think how in life we again live surrounded by storms. We find ourselves so many times in deep water, but it is futile to try to deny what it is, and think that we're going to be protected that way. The key is to know how to jump into the deep water and swim through it without drowning. And that is how the idea of the title of my book and the structure of my book came from. The first part, as I have just told you, is deep water. So in this first part, I have included a lot of poems that deal with factors that make us, be in that deep water. It can be our childhood experiences, our personality, our fears, our experience with death and loss, heartbreaks, our way of dealing with stress and work. All of those factors can make us suffer from anxiety and lead us to depression. Since my book is really focused on those two mental disorders. But of course, that's not the only thing. So Deep Waters is about that. But the second part of my poem focuses on drowning. As you see in the piece of art or the illustration here, we see the woman drowning, like going deeper into the end of the ocean. That really happens when you are going through depression. I included poems that try to express with metaphors, analogies, with specific images, what it feels like having depression. I try to make people aware that having depression is not something that you can snap out of like this. It is really a trap that you find yourself in, which it's very difficult to get out of. You need help, and this is like what the last part of the book is about. It's called Swimming. And you see again in the illustration of Marcela Bolivar, you see the woman who was before drowning, going into the deep end. Now she is swimming back to the surface. With the help and support of professionals and of people who you love and who love you, we can get out of depression, and we also can learn how to live with these ups and downs that never seem to leave us. And so the last part, Swimming, I include poems that talk about how important it is to have the resources to know how to swim these stormy waters. There are poems in which I explain lessons that I learned from my therapy sessions. There are poems that also include lessons that I have learned by observing nature. There's no best teacher than nature. Nature teaches us to slow down, to focus on the present and stay as calm and in one place. Nature also teaches us that we are not in control, and we learn to let go. We need to learn to let go. And of course, there are other also poems where I express the way that these lessons that I have learned from professionals and from nature, how I have applied them to my own life in situations where really I was feeling I was going towards drowning instead of swimming. I'm sorry, those are my dogs. I don't know if you can hear them. They are my dogs outside barking. But yes, so those are the 3 parts of my book and a little bit of what you will find in my poems. And that's it. This is what I wanted to say about my book, Swimming Not Drowning. Let me remind you again that my publisher is Legacy Book Press. If you go to their website, www.legacybookpress.com, you can find links to buy it if you want to, and also more information about the book and myself. You can also write me an email if you want to connect or you need, to express your feelings about what you just read. Feel free to do so. My email address is my name, Mari-Carmen, all together, and then 1999 @hotmail.com. Let me show you. I wrote it here. It's kind of so long that it's difficult to remember, so it's written here. As you see, it's again my name, Mari-Carmen, and then 1999 @hotmail.com. I am working on building a website, an author's website. When it's out, I'll let you know too. And you can go also there to purchase my book if you feel that it can help. I hope you enjoyed as much as I did when I wrote it. Thank you for being here with me, and I hope to hear from you. Bye-bye.